Today, I'm going to be looking at this thing, the new Mercedes E-Class. Now, the E-Class is a little bit like one of these, a multi-tool, or Swiss Army knife as you and I know it. So this thing has got to be a set of pliers, it's also got to be a little saw and a knife as well. Whereas the E-Class has got to be a taxi, a luxury limo, and also one of the fastest four-door saloons on planet Earth. And it's been updated for 2021. Now I want to see if those updates now bring it in line with the BMW 5 Series and Audi A6, or maybe it even betters them. But before I start delving into the German saloon, remember to hit the like button and subscribe because we've got plenty more awesome reviews just like this one. So if you go into a Mercedes showroom today, you'll have two versions of the E-Class to choose from. Most will look like this, which is an AMG line, but there's also an entry-level Sport, which is a little bit more rounded at the front and has a different grille. And I'll put a picture of that up right now. That's the Sport. This is the AMG line. So what we have here is a different grille. Now this takes inspiration from AMG's Panamericana grille, and I think it looks really good. Has a lot more presence compared to the old AMGs and the old AMG lines. Also got a new headlight design, which is a little bit thinner and a bit more aggressive. And the front bumper is also a bit sportier, a bit more angular. Now these are sort of fake vents. They look like they're brake cooling ducts, but actually they're completely covered up, although there is a slight channel here to send air around the front bumper and over the wheels. And speaking of the wheels, we have lots of different options to choose from. So they start off with 17s and go all the way up to 20 inches. Now these are the 18s and I think they look fantastic because you've got quite a classic AMG design here. But there is quite a thick sidewall. I think it looks fine on the 18s. I think if you went for the 17s, it might look a little bit on the rubbish side. Not really that many changes going on the side profile of the car, but the back is where some real major change comes in. So on the old car, you used to have these small, relatively rounded lights, but now they are horizontal and cut into the boot a bit. In fact, it's actually a similar design to what you get on a Ford Fiesta. And there's a reason for that. Because if you have lights like this, it actually makes the car look wider than it actually is. They haven't made the car any wider, but it just gives it more presence on the road, and it's a clever design trick. Now this is the plug-in hybrid model, and we've got a charging port at the back of the car. This is actually a really handy place to have it, because if you've got it at the side, you can sometimes have to stretch the cable further than it wants to go on a public charger, but at the back, just simply reverse in and it won't be a stretch. Now if this were a normal E-Class, we'd have 540 litres of storage back here. And if you were to go for the estate version, that goes up to 640, both of which are actually a little bit bigger than what you get on the E-Class's rivals. However, being the plug-in hybrid version, they store the electrical gubbins at the back here, and that means the boot space shrinks to 370 litres, 370 for the plug-in and 540 for the normal one. Bit of a difference, and it also gives you quite a peculiar shape to the boot floor because we've got quite a deep boot here, and then all of a sudden we have this shelf, and underneath it is where I assume they store the batteries. Now it works quite well because it means we can put the charging cables on top of them and hide them away a bit, but still it's a little bit peculiar. Anyway, we've got a bit more storage underneath the boot floor for things like a first aid kit and also tyre repair stuff, and also a bit of netting at the side to prevent your shopping from flying all over the place. Let's get on to the engines, and my goodness, have we got a lot to go through. So let's start off with the new motors. We've got a 3-litre straight six producing up to 367 horsepower, and also a new 2-litre 4-cylinder engine producing from 184 horsepower. Now you can get those in either petrol or diesel form. You can also get them with mild hybrid systems, which give you a bit of an electric boost lower down. So let's say if you're pulling away from a set of traffic lights, you'll have a electric shove to give you a bit more acceleration. And they also come in either rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive form, and all cars come with 9-speed automatic gearboxes. This one, however, is a plug-in hybrid. So it's the 2 litre and it's badged, this particular one, as the E300DE because it's the diesel plug-in hybrid. You can also get a petrol one, which is simply badged the E300E. Now, not only do we have a 2 litre motor, either petrol or diesel, but it's also hooked up to an electric motor, and together they produce 306 brake horsepower and a ridiculous 700 Newton meters of torque, which is just mad. That is absolutely supercar levels of torque. Ridiculous in an executive saloon. Now, being a plug-in hybrid, it's also hooked up to a battery that will allow you to drive on electric power alone for up to 34 miles. And as the name suggests, you can plug it in at a home charger or a fast charger and top it up on the go, so you don't have to charge it up through the motor. But that's not all. You have the E53, which has a 3 litre straight 6 producing 435 brake horsepower and also comes with a mild hybrid system. And you can also get the E63, which comes with a twin turbo V8 producing 612 horsepower if you go for it in S guise. This really is one of the most versatile cars you can buy.
One of the big differences we've got in the interior is you no longer have the dial to adjust the infotainment screens. You now have this touchpad that's got haptic feedback. And when you're sat still, it's actually really good. So as I'm going from left to right, you might be able to hear it. You can hear there's a clicking and you get a slight little vibration to confirm that you're doing something to the sat-nav screen. Again, it works really well when you're sat still, but when you're driving, it would be quite nice to have a dial down here. And we've also got touch controls on this new AMG steering wheel. Now, the steering wheel itself looks really very good and it's lovely to hold with perforated leather on the side for a proper sporty feel. But you've got these touch controls, which are a bit of a mixed bag because they're a bit like the ones that you get on the Volkswagen Golf, but the Golf has haptic feedback and we don't have that on the Mercedes, so it can feel a little bit vague with what you're doing. The good thing is, though, is they're not ultra sensitive, so when I'm moving around the different menus on the virtual cockpit and on the infotainment screen, you don't feel like you're going to be flicking through loads of menus without realising it. What your movements translate really well to what happens on the screens. It would be just nice, though, if it had a little bit of a vibration feedback. And that brings me on to the upgraded MBUX infotainment screens. Now in here, we've got them in 12.3 inches at both screens. And oh my goodness, they are gorgeous. It makes you feel like you're in a really high-tech car. Instead of having a multi-layer menu system on the front screen, you only really see 3 icons at once, and then you just scroll across them to find what you're after, or use the touchpad down here, which can be a little bit overly sensitive. So if I were to go into the navigation, we have a really lovely map that is nice and responsive. But on this car, and it comes as an optional extra, you can get augmented reality nav, which is so cool. So what it does is there's a camera at the front of the car, and that'll relay footage into the cabin. So when you're coming up to, let's say, a roundabout, the sat-nav will switch from a map to a live video at the front of the car, and it'll overlay directional arrows of where you need to go. And I'll show you that when we get this car on the road a little bit later. Now, you've got other cool features on here as well, such as the comfort settings, which isn't just like your climate settings at all. We can go in here and change the ambient lighting, and we've got ambient lighting strips all over the dash and down the side here. In fact, it's probably one of the best ambient lighting systems in its class. It is so cool, and you can obviously change the colour and the brightness of it as well. But there's also an energizing comfort feature in this model, which is brilliant because you can have different modes to either wake you up while you're driving, particularly if you've woken up really early like I have and are feeling quite tired. There's also a power nap function. Now, this is really interesting because obviously it's not designed for when you're driving, because that would just be asking for a lawsuit, but it's more for when you're parked up at a service station and you've got 15 or 20 minutes to kill and you need to have a nap. What it'll do is it'll change the ambient lighting and the climate settings and the seat settings to put you in the optimum position to have a nap, so you can continue your journey feeling refreshed, or as refreshed as you can after a 20-minute nap. Now, joining that infotainment screen is an equally sized virtual cockpit, and it is so good. Again, the resolution is magnificent, and there's a lot of customization options on here as well. So I can access the navigation menu really easily, and if I go into that, I can either see it in between the speedo and rev counter, or I can have it so that it dominates pretty much the whole screen. And what's also cool is you can change the design of it as well. So at the moment, I've got it in the normal mode, but if you're wanting to feel a little bit on the sporty side, we can go to the home button, go over to styles and display, and then I can change it to sport. And what that'll do is it'll make the dials go from blue to yellow and make you feel like you're in an AMG, even though it's only an AMG line. Now, what is quite interesting on here as well is that the buttons actually correlate to the different screens. So a lot of the time on a car, if you want to adjust the central infotainment screen, you usually have to use a dial in the center console or your hand, and then you use the buttons on the steering wheel to control the virtual cockpit. But on the Mercedes, you use the right-hand side to control the dials in front of you, and the left-hand side to control the infotainment screen. So while the lack of haptic feedback, I should say, on the steering wheels is a bit of a pain, it does actually make quite a lot of sense. Storage is pretty damn good too. So underneath this retractable cover, we've got a couple of cup holders, and I apologise for drinking at that coffee firm. I didn't buy the drink. But you can actually take the cup holders out if you want to. So if you do that, you open up a bit more of a storage tray. There's also a wireless charging pad in there, which will fit pretty much any phone, and also a USB-C connector. But unfortunately, that's the only one that can connect up Apple CarPlay. We have a couple here under the armrest, but we've tried it. Apple CarPlay doesn't want to play ball when we've hooked it up with that. And speaking of under here, we have a relatively big storage bin. It's quite long, but not that deep. Again, two USB-C connectors in here. And down at the side, we've also got a pretty decent cup holder as well. And the last thing I want to touch on is just the fit and finish. Now, when you jump into this car, it looks so luxurious and just really grabs your attention, particularly with this amazing wood effect on the dashboard and the center console. But it's only really when you start prodding around a little bit that it does start to feel a little bit cheaper than it looks. You've got a slight bit of creak on the center console, and also some of the vents just don't feel quite as nice as they look. That is nitpicking a little bit because it is still a very nice car in here, but admittedly the BMW 5 Series and Audi A6 just feel a little bit nicer than this. And that brings me on to price, because the E-Class sits pretty much right in the middle. You've got the A6, which costs around £40,000. You've got the 5 Series, which comes in at £39,000, and this thing, which comes in at £39,700 for the entry-level Sport. But of course, there are many different trim levels to go for, so I'm going to see if I can remember them. There's the Sport, the AMG line, the AMG Line Edition, the AMG Line Premium, and the AMG Line Night Edition Premium Plus. I think I got that right. And that's the model that we're in right at the moment, which comes in at around about £50,000. Now, it's a bit odd because ours comes with 18-inch wheels and you get 20 inches on the Night Edition. But we also get with this model a panoramic roof and also the Burmester stereo, which is really very good. Of course, you can spend more if you want, if you go for the E53, and then there's also the E63. And if you go for the E63S, well, you're looking at £100,000, but then again, you're looking at about 100 grand for an M5 too. The back of the E-Class feels a lot like a 5 Series and an A6 in terms of space, and while there might be some subtle differences between them, they all feel pretty much exactly the same. So I'm just under 6 foot, and legroom not a problem at all. Same for headroom, and we've also got the optional panoramic roof as well, which typically cuts into headroom a bit, but I've still got a good 10 to 15 centimetres of headroom still to go. So if you're 6 foot and over, space back here won't be a problem at all. What is nice about the E-Class though is that the rear seats are super reclined, so I'm kind of wanting to sink into them and take a nap because they are really comfortable. So if you're being driven in a taxi or a luxury limo or Uber Lux service, then you're probably going to fall asleep as soon as you get into the back here. The armrest, Meanwhile, flick that down. I've got enough space back here for a little tray underneath the armrest, and we've also got a pair of cup holders, which are really decent. Probably one of the best armrests that you can get in this class, which is oddly specific. We've also got some climate settings back here. It's kind of a one-size-fits-all, so if someone's hot and the other person's cold, somebody is going to be disappointed. Now, we've also got a little tray beneath here with 2 USB-C ports and also a good old-fashioned 12-volt charger.
This E-Class makes such an amazing first impression because I'm driving along in what is all specced up a £50,000 car, but it looks like, and in most part feels like, I'm driving a luxury limousine, something that costs a lot more than the E-Class does. It's a mix of this incredible dual screen system that we've got going on, the stunning design of the center console, and a steering wheel that feels really lovely to hold. Yes, that feeling of luxury does get a teeny bit tainted when you start touching around the center console a little bit, and if you were to move it around, but really that's why an E-Class is an E-Class and an S-Class is an S-Class. The important thing is the touch points, the areas that you're going to come into contact most, feel absolutely fantastic, as does the ride of this car. I am on a horrifically bumpy road, and this thing feels incredibly luxurious and quiet. But we can go even quieter and smoother by putting it into electric mode. So now we're running on battery power alone, and it just becomes very, very quiet indeed. The only thing I will say is you do get a bit of road noise that comes through. It's not intrusive, but it is noticeable that when you're driving along, we're doing 40 at the moment. If I pick that up and go to 50, it's definitely more noticeable now. Let's talk about what the E-Class is like to drive. Short answer is fantastic. Lovely weight to the steering, and again we talked earlier about the lovely grip that we've got on this steering wheel as well. Nice bit of control of the body, so if you are flinging it around some corners, there's no real lean, no softness to it. It definitely feels like it's in command of the road. It's not a driver's car. If you're after something where you feel like you're a real part of the driving experience, I would say a BMW 5 Series does a better job. Now coming onto a motorway, see how quick this is. I've got it in sport mode now, and yeah, it's pretty fast. Doesn't feel lightning fast, and even though we've got 700 Newton meters of torque with the 2 power units working together, it's not going to really throw you to the back of your seat like an AMG model would, but it feels quick enough. And that brings me on to tech, because the E-Class does a fantastic job of taking the driving out of driving, because we've got a suite of semi-autonomous driving modes. Now, a lot of that actually comes as an optional extra, but it's kind of worth going for because they are so cool. So what I can do at the moment is set the car at, we're in a 60 zone at the moment, so I'll set it at 60. And what it's doing is it's using lane keep assist and also adaptive cruise control, so that while I'm driving along, we're turning in the road, so the steering naturally takes over and turns the car for me. And if we come across a car that is slower, we'll slow down along with them. So I'm just coming up to a lorry, which I'm sure will be doing 50 miles an hour, and in any minute, I'm sure we'll start to slow down. There we go. That being said, the lane keep assist can be quite aggressive. So sometimes if you're overtaking a lorry and you indicate back into a lane, it can still try and pull you back into the lane that you're in. Doesn't always happen, but sometimes it can get a little bit confused. I also want to point out the augmented reality sat-nav system. So I'm meant to turn right here, and so what it does is we have a camera that appears on the sat-nav display, and it'll show me my exit as a graphic laid over the camera. And I think that is so cool. What it'll also do is when you're driving around, let's say a roundabout, or if you're coming up to a road that you need to turn in, it'll even come up with the name of the road. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a case of is the E-Class better than the 5 Series or the A6, because they all excel in different areas. The E-Class feels like the kind of car that's built for the tech fan. The technology in here is absolutely fantastic, and if you want a car that really wows you every time you step into it, I think the E-Class is probably the car to go for over the 5 Series and the A6. Yes, the sticker may be on this car over 50,000, but after a short while, I'm sure you'll be able to bag a real bargain.